Welcome to True Crime Cases. In this episode, we examine the sad and intricate example of a police officer and well-respected family man whose secret life resulted in a grisly murder in Lake. This is the tale of Matthew's covert affairs, jealousy, and fatal altercation in August of 2013. 42-year-old McLennan had been a Johnson City, Tennessee, police officer. He was married to Aria 40, his high school sweetheart, for more over 10 years, and they appeared to be an ideal couple, having been married for 255 years. Aria was a loyal. The couple had 2 small children and a stay-at-home mother who was actively involved in church activities. Matthew was a devoted police officer who resided in a suburban area. Yet behind the scenes, things became much more complex when Matthew detained 18-year-old Joseph in late June 2013 for possession of marijuana. Skylar, a recent high school graduate, worked part-time at a nearby Kroger's. Friends characterized him as quiet and reticent as he was getting ready for community college. But before Matthew nabbed him, he had a problematic record that included many charges for marijuana usage. Although Joseph's future was uncertain, Matthew saw a change in him following his imprisonment. Offered to dismiss the charges if Skylar consented to have sex in secret. Desperate to avoid jail time, Skylar agreed that their encounters would go from being infrequent to being regular. Matthew was torn as a result of the transition from illegal sex to a serious love engagement. He felt embarrassed and, knowing that his career, wife, and public image were all at stake, he was paranoid. An honorable police officer and devoted family guy, his feelings for Skylar made him feel both alive and afraid. Aria started to feel that their marriage was failing, but she was unaware of Matthew's hidden existence. But was anxious since she felt powerless to change it and couldn't understand why. Matthew did all in his power to conceal his affair, even fabricating an alibi to cover his absence from. However, Skylar was torn between using burner phones to talk to Skylar at home. He avoided going to jail because of their friendship, but he wasn't emotionally ready for the intensity. Despite their relationship, Matthew's vows to divorce his wife and begin a life with her never occurred, leaving Skylar feeling irritated and as though their relationship's confidentiality had been exploited. Was having a negative impact on both men, and their power dynamics were evident. Matthew was the older, respected authority figure, but Skylar felt compelled to carry on the affair because everyone felt stuck in their own way because of this love triangle and the dread of legal repercussions. Matthew was drowning in remorse, Aria was perplexed, and Skylar was torn between anger and dread. However, on the morning of August 28, 2013, they were unaware of the devastating path this triangle would take. A hiker called William was on a trail close to Buffalo Mountain with his dog, Autumn. It was soon after 8 o'clock at Johnson City, Tennessee's park, when Dub spotted something strange. Noticed a little clearing next to the forested area that appeared to be a pile of clothing. Curious, upon approaching, he was taken aback by what he discovered. The man was laying face down still, and Williams subsequently told authorities that he felt a rush of terror sweep over him, indicating that he had been severely battered. William dialed 911 right away, his voice shaking as he provided the operator with the body's location. Was subsequently determined to be 42-year-old officer Matthew McKellen, a prominent member of the. When William was subsequently questioned by local media outlet WJHL-TV, he was clearly disturbed and stated he couldn't. He had been traveling the route for years and thought something similar had occurred in their small town, and never anticipated coming onto such a horrifying scene. I was unsure of what to believe, William claimed. I was. Police officers and paramedics were merely afraid and didn't want to touch anything for a few minutes. When the investigators got to the location, they immediately cleared the remote area and started. Matthew's corpse had obvious evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull in order to process the crime scene. Had protective injuries on his arms, indicating that he had attempted to fend off his assailant. Because there wasn't much blood on the ground, police assumed the murder hadn't occurred there, and it seemed the murderer had either staged the scene or attempted to transfer the corpse. To perplex detectives, the savagery of the crime first shocked the society. believed it could have been an attempted mugging, but the degree of violence didn't amount to a simple robbery. When Johnson City friends, relatives, and other residents learned of Matthew's passing, officers were shocked to learn that Matthew's wife, Aria, was apparently distraught. She and their 2 kids were unaware of Matthew's whereabouts at the time of her husband's passing, and now, when police arrived at the crime site in August, they were forced to confront the heartbreaking truth. Officer Matthew McLennan's body was discovered on the 28th of 2013, making it evident that they were dealing with a violent situation. Was discovered in a clearing close to Buffalo Mountain Park, and detectives were troubled by the situation. Officer Tom Ridge and Detective Sarah Watkins Brush started processing the scene right away. Despite being experienced detectives, both policemen were uneasy about the grim aspects of this case. Matthew suffered serious physical abuse, with blunt force damage to his head appearing to be the source. Death's extensive defense scars on his arms demonstrated that he had retaliated against his assailant. But when authorities examined Matthew more closely, they discovered something even more unsettling. His genitalia were gone. Police speculated about the killer's motivation after seeing this horrifying detail. Was it personal? Ideas of a crime of passion started to circulate, with some detectives thinking that the removal of the genitals was intended to convey a message that could have had to do with the Sunshine family and society. Of consciousness and Zen, other cults had started to operate nearby, and the situation got even more. When bite marks were initially found on the corpse, researchers thought the potential for cannibalism, but forensic examination quickly offered another explanation for the bite. Markings most likely originated from a scavenger that wandered the woodland area, such as a coyote. Detective Watkins Brush observed in the vicinity of Buffalo Mountain that the bite marks didn't appear to be related to the cause of death, although it happened after Matthew was slain. She told the Johnson City Press, "We're investigating something, but we think these injuries were." Although there was some post-mortem blood on the ground next to Matthew's body, it didn't seem to be enough. Investigators employed luminol to look for more evidence indicating the attack had occurred at that precise location. Traces of blood in the hopes that it would enable them to reconstruct the chronology of events. However, there were none. Instant indications of a scuffle nearby, which led the authorities to assume the assault had either began elsewhere, or Mike had been drawn there by an investigator he knew. Throughout the scene, the case was steadily growing more complicated and unsettling than anybody could have predicted. Had foreseen the crime's savagery, as well as the odd and metaphorical wounds it caused. Skylar was the first person the police focused on since they had more questions than answers. 18-year-old Farber, a recent high school graduate with a problematic past, was well known in, but not for the proper reasons. Johnson City has battled a marijuana addiction for years, resulting in several encounters with the authorities. Officer Matthew McKinnon had just arrested him. Several months prior, during a routine traffic stop, a tiny quantity of marijuana was discovered in his automobile, but Matthew offered a proposition that would alter the young person's life forever rather than charging Skylar. Matthew saw a chance to use his position of authority to influence Skylar for free sex. Matthew asked Skylar to pray for the vulnerable adolescent in return for not arresting him. Skylar, who was already having trouble surviving, felt imprisoned and wanted to have sex with him anytime he wanted. Matthew threatened to put him in jail and ruin his future if he didn't comply with his demands. He knows how to conceal his secrets while maintaining a well-respected public persona as a devoted parent and spouse. He was a model cop to everyone else, but to Skylar, he was someone entirely else. Demanding, domineering, and more suspicious lover as their covert connection persisted. Skylar's emotions became more complex. On the one hand, he looked on Matthew to shield him from the law for his drug usage, but he also felt exploited and repulsed by the circumstances. Matthew's assurances that he would help him clean up and start again never felt genuine to Skylar, who had dreamed of leaving Tennessee to go to college, but as those aspirations faded due to the stress of the affair and Joseph's worsening addiction, left him feeling bewildered, enraged, and hopeless when, given their knowledge of Skylar's relationship to Matthew Detective, the police hauled him in for interrogation. The questioning, led by Sarah Watkins Brush, concentrated on Skylar's turbulent connection with the officer. Skylar first denied any signs of anxiety, fidgeting, and avoiding eye contact participation in the murder, but when he was under pressure, his attitude changed, and he confessed to the affair. Skylar informed the cops that he had power over me and was keen to stress that it wasn't voluntary. As the cops persisted in pressing Skylar's responses, all the power I had was a butt that he could bleep. More sentimental, expressing wrath and emotions of betrayal, particularly after finding out that Matthew had been having affairs with other young guys, which caused Joseph to lose her mind. And detectives started to worry that he could have become violent due to his anger at being controlled. Officer Matthew McLennan's wife of 15 years, Kelly Ann McLennan 40, was well known around Johnson City. Appeared to be a devoted mother and wife, a renowned police officer, and the ideal pair. However, their marriage had been chilly behind closed doors during the previous 3 years until police brought. Aria was still in shock, but was eager to comply when she was questioned following Matthew's murder. Kelly talked candidly about the developing gap between her and Matthew while they were seated in the interrogation room. She said how her husband seems to have changed over the past few years. He was once such. She told investigator Sarah Watkins said that she was so involved, but now it seemed like he was somewhere else, as if he had erected a wall between us. The emotional bond they had previously shared faded, and their physical bond had all but vanished, so she thought it was his worry. Employment, or perhaps a problem they could resolve over time. But there was another issue that had disturbed Aria by revealing what she had found in their house several months prior to Matthew's death. While their son was abroad, she discovered a cache of homosexual pornography concealed in the closet of his bedroom. She remarked in a quivering voice, "At first, I didn't want to believe it was his. It was summer Bible camp. I reasoned that it may have been related to his work or that she made a mistake by not confronting Matthew about it in the hopes that the problem would go away. But the revelation continued to nag in the back of her mind, raising. She couldn't help but wonder whether her spouse had been concealing anything that the police later revealed. Detective Watkins's encounter gave Aria a shocking revelation that rocked her world. Skylar Farber, a young man with whom Matthew had been having sex, had been controlling his. After seeing him while on duty, Aria's face turned pale due to the weight of his sensitive young mind. She was in disbelief and unable to comprehend what she was hearing from the guy she believed when the revelation struck. Aria, who she knew had been leading a second life and misleading her and their kids, broke down into, "I swear on my grandmother's Bible that I had no idea. I'm crying and gagging nearly to the point of throwing up. Saw how he could have betrayed us in this way, destroying the impression that Matthew was a loyal. Now, the reality of his secret existence had ruined both her husband and father. Imagine the dark secrets that the guy she had loved for so long had been keeping from her." Aria had been living in the shadow of a falsehood, and now she was clearly confused and angry. Was forced to reassemble her shattered life as the probe into Matthew McLennan's. Police investigating the crime discovered a sinister and surprising turn in Matthew's. Investigators discovered a startling trend in Matthew's phone records and personal papers. Engaged in several covert sexual encounters with young males he had detained while on duty, including weren't routine arrests. Matthew had arranged these meetings by focusing on young guys who were at risk, usually in their late teens or early 20s, and they are frequently arrested on false accusations like Ed. After the arrests, Matthew would provide them a route if Mar wanted a possession or disorderly conduct. He said that if they consented to have sex with him, the charges would be dropped. The revelation was devastating to the local police force, and investigators were appalled by the extent of. When Matthew's predatory actions were exposed, one investigator said that it was a genuine kick in the gut. This bleat was abusing and manipulating us while sporting the same badge as the rest of us. The finding of these bleeping children caused serious worries about the potential number of further victims. Matthew has a long history of being a respected cop. Thus, this behavior may have persisted for a while, and there were now concerns that additional young guys who could have been. There were those who were embarrassed or afraid to come forward, and Matthew's involvement just made matters worse. In neighborhood initiatives such as the local high school's outreach program and Cops with Kids, intended to foster trust between youth and law enforcement, but now Matthew is dreaded by the police, may have approached even younger boys using this method, generating a spooky undertone of. Detectives investigating suspicion in the department worked non-stop, but the weight of what they were, the more they discovered, the more they understood how pervasive Matthew's abuse was, and the exposing was painful. Of power had been that lead investigator Sarah Watkins' work was no longer limited to solving murders. Justice for all the victims whose lives this dirt diaper of a situation has affected is the goal of Brush Dead. Human manipulation and destruction caused the agency to prepare for the potential for further victims. Coming out with the knowledge that the case they were handling was far more complex than they had first believed. John Moore was a disturbed boy who had been in foster care and was looking for acceptance and affection at all the wrong places, but it felt like he had finally met someone when Matthew McDonald came into his life. Matthew, who genuinely cared, had detained John for stealing from a nearby 7-Eleven in 2011. Matthew gave Tate and many others a way out, promising to remove the accusations in return. The connection swiftly became sexual into something far more intimate. But for John, it wasn't merely. When police interrogated Dee, he thought Matthew truly loved him despite the trickery. "No one has ever loved me as much as Matthew," Jonty stated after his murder, the intensity of their bond. Did John tell investigators that he cared for me and made me feel important by breaking his voice? I didn't care about what he forced me to do since I believed that for 2 years, DeJounte stayed in. Matthew believed he was unique throughout his life, but in the summer of 2013, John's world fell apart one late. He noticed Matthew's car parked in a dimly lit spot on Main Street on an August night as he was making his way to the 24-hour Walmart. Curious John approached the illuminated area of the property and discovered Matthew in the act having sex with. Matthew also tricked Skylar, a young man, into dating him after spotting them together. Felt like a dagger to John's heart, and he subsequently told the police how heartbroken he was. "I was unable to. It made me sick to hear John say that, and I simply stood there, thinking I was the only one. Everything I believed to be true suddenly fell apart, and I felt foolish." The betrayal was intolerable for John had previously been having issues with his identity, self-worth, and his relationship with Matthew and Skylar. Made him understand that Matthew was using him as a pawn in his twisted game, and DeJounte departed the scene without approaching them at the moment. They were too surprised to respond, but the experience stoked their rage and bitterness in him that would only intensify in the weeks that followed the Walmart parking lot incident. It into a pivotal point in the inquiry, illuminating how deeply Matthew had exploited the sentiments of betrayal that John had against everyone in his life, along with the proof of Matthew's. A man who preyed on young men who were at risk of abandonment was depicted by several covert partnerships. Part 8. On the evening of August 28, 2013, Skylar left a path of emotional destruction in his wake. In the parking lot of a remote clearing close to Buffalo Mountain, Farber encountered Matthew McLennan. Park and the two had been at odds for a while, and Skylar was upset because of the treachery and envy. And disgusted by Matthew's sexual manipulations of me and several other young guys, I simply wanted the guy to experience what I did, as Skylar subsequently told the police once the dispute got heated. He then confessed to authorities that he was high as a kite on marijuana when his emotions got out of hand. It impaired his judgment and heightened his anger, and in a fit of rage, he pulled out a hockey puck from his car and smashed it into Matthew, who was removed. "I didn't really want to murder him," Skylar remarked in a weak voice, taken by surprise and a little inebriated. Matthew collapsed, and I had the impression that I was seeing someone else do it in a movie. To the ground, and rather than calling, Skylar experienced a rush of excitement and dread. He glanced at Matthew's lifeless body in a panic, and a terrible instinct overcame him in an act of Skylar told the police that he had eaten pieces of Matthew's flesh out of extreme rage and desperation. "I just ate a piece of him because I was so furious that I had no idea what I was doing. In fact," he reminded me of. He admitted to eating Matthew's genitalia in addition to the overcooked hamburger, which was surprising. When police arrived at the scene, the revelation left detectives and investigators feeling uncomfortable and incredulous. They discovered Matthew's body in a horrifying condition, and the evidence pointed them to Skylar, who had escaped but was caught after being seen close by witnesses reported seeing a young male fleeing. Officers swiftly made the connection, and Skylar was taken into custody while being questioned. "I felt as like I was in a nightmare as the truth of what he had done started to seep in. I never wanted it to go this far," he added, his eyes wide with panic as the cops put together the information of the killing and learned of Joseph's past relationship with Matthew, which made them believe he was the murderer. The connection that used to make him happy had become a dangerous entanglement, and he was taken away in shackles. Skylar's remorse started to overwhelm the rage that had prompted him to do. "The crime caused me to lose myself in addition to Matthew," he continued, with tears flowing down his cheeks. The neighborhood was startled by his acts, causing them to question how love could become so lethal. Became a warning story about the negative aspects of obsession and treachery. On March 25, 15, the courtroom was crowded as Skylar Farber was put on trial for the vicious killing of Matthew McClan. With both men's friends and family members keen to learn more about Joseph's attorney's case, James Dukovich said that his client's actions were not his fault because of his severe. Dukovich informed the jury that Skylar was under the influence of marijuana when he committed this act. The defense argued that Joseph's marijuana use caused mental health issues and psychosis. It changed his understanding of reality, and they provided proof that he had a past. Narek invited in a psychologist to discuss the use of marijuana, which they said may cause temporary insanity. In her testimony about marijuana's impact on mental health, Dr. Ellen Quack stated that when under the influence, people may suffer from extreme paranoia or hallucinations. In response, the prosecution, represented by lawyer Sarah Jackson, emphasized that Joseph had been well conscious of what he was doing when the murder occurred, and Jackson emphasized the terrifying details. Describes how Skylar killed Matthew and then dismembered his body, devouring his genitalia and flesh. "Wasn't an act of passion, rather, it was planned and graphic," she told the jurors, and Skylar was well aware of it. Skylar experienced a mixture of fear and hope as the experiment went on because of what he was doing with the marijuana. He had some optimism because of his defense, but he also knew that the evidence against him was so overpowering that there was a great deal of stillness when the jury eventually returned a verdict. Skylar was crushed by the courtroom ruling when he was convicted guilty of second-degree murder. The court voiced concerns about the severity of the offense and its consequences during sentence. Skylar was given a sentence of 25 years to life in jail, and Matthew's family wept as he heard it. Flooded his eyes, and he experienced a surge of remorse. "I never wanted this to happen," he thought. "If I could go back in time, I would." Skylar suffered in the months after the verdict. He frequently reenacted that night's events in his head to deal with his new reality, hoping he had made other decisions. The tragedy of love turning to loss plagued him daily while he was inside. As the years went by, Skylar Lee Kelly, Ann McLennan, and John's lives took rather different turns in the. Skylar stayed incarcerated following the sad incident of Matthew McClain's murder. He found it difficult to adapt to life while serving his 25 life sentence for the vicious murder of Matthew. Skylar spent a lot of time thinking while he was behind bars, dealing with the fallout from his daily acts. Considering his previous choices and the ones that brought him to this point in prison, he started taking seminars and took part in group therapy in the hopes of improving himself in spite of his depressing environment. He said he wanted to change his life and maybe assist others from making the same mistakes. Meanwhile, following the turbulent conclusion of her marriage, Aria found comfort in an unexpected place. Started delving further into her beliefs. In January 2016, she formally became a Catholic. declared her desire to become a nun because she believed that living a life dedicated to helping others would. She entered a convent in her hometown of Loy, New Jersey, to find serenity and meaning. Centered on assisting homeless people and at-risk adolescents, Arya's metamorphosis was extensively covered in local media, with many applauding her choice to make such a significant change in her life. After the turmoil of his relationship, Jonty also aimed to change the world for the better. He moved to Washington, D.C. with Matthew, where he started promoting criminal justice reform. Jonty collaborated with a number of groups that addressed topics including police accountability, and he related his experience, highlighting the need for improved monitoring of the rights of underprivileged populations. John's work on law enforcement and the perils of judicial system manipulation, acknowledgement, and he received invitations to speak at a number of gatherings, such as a panel discussion on youth. As they moved forward with their lives, each of them held a criminal justice degree from a prestigious university. The wounds of their history, Skylar had to confront the harsh reality of jail in his pursuit of redemption. While John utilized his experiences to fight, Arya discovered a new mission and embraced her faith. Although their paths may have varied in search of a better system, each person looked for their own healing and purpose. Manner demonstrating that hope may arise even in the midst of disaster. I appreciate you listening to True Crime Cases. Next time, True Crime Cases will join us as we unearth yet another horrifying tale of murder, deception, and treachery.